Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to move on to staff reports. Item 7.1, Reimagining School Safety Staff and Community Report. And I believe Dr. Brown is going to kick us off on this. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you in conversation today. President Kerr, members of the board, senior team, and community and staff who are tuning in. We're very grateful to be here with you. I'm joined with colleagues, partners, community members, and important people who have really committed to an ongoing conversation in the spirit of talking about school safety. So the presentation that we are going to share with you today, and I'll ask each person who's presenting to introduce themselves as they speak, but the presentation that we are sharing today really reflects what I consider to be true engagement. We came together on the topic of school safety, and in the last academic year have spent about 20 hours in face-to-face correspondence with one another, where we have agreed, we've disagreed, we've had honest discourse, we've developed some new understandings, and we continue to have some disagreements around the concept of reimagining school safety in our district. But the disagreements have really led us to better understandings and some ways that we wish to push ourselves as we go forward in this process together as a large urban school district and while lifting up voice in our community. So today we are going to tell a story from a community perspective and a district lens. And we will focus some on the past, some on the present, and some on the future. But more than that, we are working to really lift up the idea of being informed collaborators in what we do. So we have several goals that we'll accomplish today to share what brought us together in this work around reimagining school safety, to orient our work in community, staff, and student feedback, and to highlight a path forward with recommended next steps. And when you think about the different levels of public impact, we really have worked through the inform, through the consult, past the level of involvement into the collaboration stage, which I hope takes us into a stage of empowerment in the work that we continue to do together. So with that, I'm going to pass to my colleague, Chris Covington.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. So good afternoon. My name is Christopher Covington. My pronouns are they and he. I'm glad to be on Tongva land, also known as Long Beach. And we're going to start our presentation. I am one of the leads with the Safer LBUSD campaign. Thanks. I'm one of the leads of the Safer LBUSD campaign and also representing the Genders and Sexualities Alliance Network, who we actually serve many of your schools in this district. And so to start our community story, we wanted to take you back to 2012, a time where community members and students were really struggling to find connection, find support, and were engaging in a system in which discipline was the answer. Detentions, on-campus suspensions was the way that we taught students how to correct their behaviors or specific challenges that they were having on their campuses. And so in 2012, the Every Student Matters campaign really came together to share the light and the stories of the students and the challenges that were being faced. And in partnership with many nonprofits and community groups, we were able to work with the district to pass a resolution to reduce the suspensions that are in the district. And many of those strategies to reduce the suspensions were in restorative justice. So that's kind of like the birth of having conversations of school climate and the safety of students on our campuses. And so with the introduction of restorative justice, we really fought on the implementation. Once it was passed, we worked with the district to make it happen, specifically CCAJ, which you all know and love. We're doing that work to make it happen. And as implementation happens, sometimes there's challenges. There's challenges of funding and priorities shifting, and that continued through up until 2019, which community would come to the school district and really lend their voices to say, we really need to focus on school climate, and we need to find solutions that work for the students who are most impacted by a lot of the policies that are being at hand. And so we're starting this story by sharing a lot of the community work, because we have been at the table and we've been a community partner, as Dr. Brown has mentioned, and we've continued to engage, and we're still at a point where we need to move the district forward. And so I'm going to pass it off to my co-lead, Kim, to introduce yourself and continue the story.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Dr. Tabari, she, her pronouns. And so we are at 2020 in this timeline, right? I'm sorry, and this is Jerlene to my right, who's also part of this community story. Wanted to introduce her as well. Jerlene Tatum. And so here we are in 2020, a couple years ago, the unthinkable and unimaginable murder of George Floyd just really threw us into visible and invisible crisis mode. And policing, especially Black and brown bodies, was brought to the forefront across the globe. And here in Long Beach, we had been wrestling with high suspension rates, as Chris just mentioned, for students of color, and decades of poor academic grades for Black and other students of color. And I really want to say that, to quote Audre Lorde, there is no thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't live single issue lives. So you'll hear us along this conversation really connecting race and gender and social emotional learning of our students to this notion of how we reimagine safety, because it's all connected, and we must take an intersectional approach. So in 2020, myself and some others met with Dr. Baker to ask the district to end its contract with LBPD. The district agreed to end the contract with the 3 police officers at the time. However, policing practices and procedures still remained. And so a year later, 2021, the unthinkable happened. A student was shot and killed by a now ex-school safety officer. Never in the history of the district has anything like this ever happened, not to my knowledge anyway. And Mona Rodriguez was shot as they drove away by an officer that was not well trained and new to the district. A few of the community organizers from the 2012 campaign reignited the call to action to reimagine school safety, and here we are, with researchers, with community activists, with parents, with students, and the district sitting at the table to truly make transformative change at LBUSD. I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Noosh to talk about some research collected on this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Tabari. Hi, I'm Dr. Nushin Valizadeh, and
Wait, I'm sorry, the next slide. Sorry, that was my slide too, the next slide, sorry. And so the campaign really had some simple requests from June of 2022, and then some more long-term ones as of June 2023. And so for this year, we wanted the district to commit to disarming school personnel, to collect and regularly report data on incident reports and referrals to law enforcement, to audit your own policies, to contribute to criminalizing students, and to form a committee to develop alternatives to school policing. And then by next year, we are hoping that you all can dismantle the school safety branch as is, so it has a new configuration, develop a school climate department to replace the school safety branch, utilize the audit findings that you all did to create alternatives to punitive policies and practices, and really reinvest in enrichment programs. So those were some of the requirements of the campaign, and again, pulled together by a host of community organizations. And now I can pass it to Noosh. Dr. Noosh.
Thank you, Dr. Tabari. So yes, I'm Dr. Nushin Valizadeh, and I have been the equity and inclusion consultant working with Dr. Tiffany Brown and also with Safer LBUSD, conducting some research from our community, our teachers, and really trying to implement some equity in education, especially with regards to race and gender issues as they come up. What the research across the board has shown, and this is across the nation, is that about school school safety, more police do not equal more perceived safety. So anyone who thinks that police being on campuses provide a much safer perception, it's actually not true. More police presence means more police involvement in lower level offenses, meaning a lot of the even everyday interactions that might happen are being policed by police, which could actually be better fit with mentors, with school teachers, with folks who can have some sort of rapport with the students. That also, even without police, it does create a culture of policing where other folks on the campus, whether it's older students, whether it's their teachers, counselors, et cetera, will then shift from being mentors into policing the students as well. So overall, the cultural shift does take place, not just with the officers. However, relationships with adults have the most positive impact on the school climate, leading to more feelings of student belonging, better success outcomes, better wellness, and just overall feeling of community and family environment on campus. Some of the findings that I was able to put together, these are just some very small snapshot of the themes that have to do with safety with teachers. What I was learning a lot about was that there was a lot of emphasis on student behavior. There had been negative student responses to teachers regarding things like dress code and their identifications being shown. Concern for student development and well-being was also very prevalent with the teachers that I spoke with. Many had voiced that students who were doing okay before the pandemic were still seeming to do all right, but the ones who were struggling before the pandemic had truly gotten to a point of major disparities. Also, with campus safety, there was some mention by teachers that the campuses had been easier to access from outside folks, and also that there was an inability to address issues, not really having the proper training or professional development to address issues or to understand what bigger red flags are and what are smaller incidents to, address them appropriately. The community had a few different things to say. So many of the community members, they were typically parents, there were students who were involved in these conversations, and they talked a lot about emotional safety and psychological safety. So the child-teacher interactions, especially around discipline, had been quite negative from what we had learned from community, especially when it came to Black students and especially when it came to students with disabilities. There was quite a bit of bullying and also children just not wanting to go to school. So children being disciplined or having being reported for not attending school, but the parents were stating that these children just did not feel well enough mentally or emotionally to go to school. They did not feel that they were going to have positive interactions with their peers or with their teachers. And there's also a lot of racial bias that I was learning about through discipline, with a lack of social and emotional resources. The physical safety, there were some were similar to what the teachers had shared, which were that there were some traffic incidents, dangerous intersections without crossing guards, but a concern that they did not necessarily want the crossing guards to come out of police units. And then also lots of fights and lockdowns before and after school, which were on campus and also close to campus.
Dr. Nushin, can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Sure.
So in your findings, these are conversations that you've had with our students, because I know some of the research that you're quoting is national research. So I just wanted to clarify that what
Right.
you were just talking about on that particular slide
Absolutely.
was specific to Long Beach Unified.
So this was the research about national research. All of this was actually conversations and focus groups that I conducted with members of my team with Long Beach Unified teachers and community parents and some students.
Great. We just wanted to make sure people understood that. Thank
Sorry
you.
about that. Thank you. And then also with those conversations with the Long Beach Unified teachers and community members, there were experiences with campus police that folks shared. So the teachers really talked a lot about the CSAs, the staff assistants, and said that they were very well appreciated and favorable rapport with students, but that some mentioned that they had been understaffed and a bit powerless, and that there were not enough at the schools. A lot of teachers had mentioned that there seemed to be equality, that there's a certain amount that are at every school, but not necessarily equitable, meaning the schools who needed them more didn't appear that they had more. And they also had shared that the presence of police on school campuses, or lack thereof, showed an increase or decrease in students' behavior. They didn't necessarily say, oh, this is wonderful that when we have police showing up on campus, the students behave better, but they were noticing a correlation which can be misconstrued to think it's good to have police on campus. However, if you look at historical trauma with police, especially in Black and brown communities that are often policed, we don't want to have that be the way that students are going to quote unquote behave. We want students to actually feel that their community is a place that they want to keep safe for themselves, for their peers, that they want to, that it's a space that they feel comfortable and safe, and they want to show up and they want to be part of that community. So it still was in line with much of the research. And then community had shared really about police presence. They had showed, I had seen a correlation where heavily policed communities had a great discomfort or fear seeing police on campus, whereas as community members who came from spaces that aren't really heavily policed did not have as much of a problem with seeing police on campus. There were personal experiences with racial profiling by police on and off campus that I was able to hear from families and from their teenagers. And many also voiced that police may not actually do anything but create a culture of distrust and criminalization. So some folks who did not even have negative experiences said that it still created a culture when they walked into the classroom that made them feel less safe. For my final piece here, a little bit more about the student voice on school safety. Students have reported wanting more supportive adults on their campus. So who is my go-to person? Who is the person who connects with me, who cares about me, who has love for me on this campus where I will want to wake up in the morning and I want to be there? Also more wellness centers with staff who can help support and problem solve, not just a place where a child is supposed to go and just figure it out, but actually a space where they can either a problem can be diffused or some more relevant help can be brought to their attention. More relationships and understanding from the adults was another need and request from students. Really understanding, just having some adults understand where they're coming from and not see them as always wanting to misbehave, wanting to make their jobs harder. And then also many had voiced less security or police presence immediately on campus would help them feel safer in their communities. Thank you.
So I'll continue just with two brief slides on what we've done in the last 3 years and specifically in the last one to continue this process of reimagining school safety. In the last 3 years, and I'm just going to highlight some of these. I don't need to speak to each one, but we, as Dr. Tabari mentioned, we eliminated outside contracts with law enforcement agencies. So we no longer have daily service by Long Beach Police Department or Lakewood Sheriff's Department on our campuses. We regionally assigned school safety officers by high school area to create a region, if you will, around the way that they are supporting or called to schools. We've made millions of dollars of increases in our resources around student mental health services, most recently as evidenced by the wellness centers in the high schools, which began last year, and then really celebrating the opportunity to add wellness centers to all of our middle school campuses during this current year. We continue to work on and enhance the practices around restorative justice that Mr. Covington mentioned earlier. He was involved in some of the early ideas around that work. We continue to seek student input on all things and certainly issues that pertain to student safety. We view students as our customers, and something that in the last few years has felt critically important to the way we plan, the way we design what we're doing, and how we evaluate what we're doing is to gather input from the student experience. And so you've heard reference to student perspective today, and certainly there's more to gain from them on this really important topic of their safety on and around the campus. Continuing to what we've done in the last year. So in the last year, we have conducted a job study of all of the positions that exist within our school safety branch. We worked with an outside consulting team who really looked at the job descriptions of each job class to say, what are we doing and is it serving the role that we need those folks to play? We've also audited all of our school safety procedures, so all of our standard operating procedures, to make sure that we are up to date and that we're not missing things that we need. And so there's been an ongoing process to do that. This school year, so just in the last month, we've implemented a new software tracking system for calls that come into school safety so that we can pull demographic information, and it gives us a more current view of the types of calls that are coming in, the schools that they're coming from, the types of issues that we're dispatching school safety, so that we can analyze how we're doing and if we should do more of something, if we should do less of something. We also, another piece that I'll highlight is that we have updated our discipline guidelines and procedures so that we are including more of the behaviors that we want to see. Sometimes discipline guidelines read like manuals of what not to do. And there is some of that present, but we're really working to use language that promotes the behaviors that we want to see, and also the way that we want to be responding to behaviors that we want to change. So that you'll see language in the guidelines around using concepts related to restorative justice, conflict resolution, healing circles, things that promote a better understanding and hopefully more connectedness on the campus than just issuing an infraction, which has been a more traditional way of handling misbehaviors. So with that, we're going to shift from the what have we been doing to the some of the perspectives around what we'll do to go forward. And back to you, Dr. Tabari. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. So we've shared some history, we've shared some research, and we've shared some current practices. So what is the road forward? How can we transform our district, as our superintendent so eloquently states in her updates? Or how can we rebrand ourselves, as our marketing videos and posts suggest? Here's how. By moving from a punitive policing model to a safety model that centers a holistic student and staff support. Together, we created this vision statement that reads, LBUSD works collaboratively with community to ensure campuses are safe for students, staff, teachers, and families, included but not limited to enrichment and violence prevention, so that all students can succeed and feel a sense of belonging. And our North Star, our big goal, was really to abolish these policing practices and weapons from the district, its employees and partners. And when I use the word abolish, I want to just define that to mean an action or an act of abolishing a system or a practice or an institution, much like we have abolished slavery back in the day. So I don't want you to be afraid of that word abolish, right? I know it's a scary word. And the big 4 components we look to: commit to reimagining school safety. This conversation is a great start. Investment in student and staff support, evaluations and culture shifts, safety for students, staff, teachers, and families. And Chris will talk a little bit about what each of those modules look like.
Thank you. So with this roadmap, the first specific element and theme that we're talking about is the commitment to reimagining safety, school safety. And so within our collaboration over the past year and some of the work that we wanted to do, we want to continue the conversations on and engagement and collaboration to reimagine safety. So that means connecting with parents, connecting with students, connecting with teachers on an ongoing conversation of how are these strategies that we're implementing being effective on our campus, and where can we grow or make pivots. And so some of the strategies that we have listed here to make that commitment a reality is continued training. So over the summer, there was a training for administrators on safety. What were those new safety protocols that are being implemented? And also what is our commitment to reimagining safety for our campuses and moving away from those punitive policies and into care and holistic support for students and staff? Some other strategies that we're implementing is engaging in the comprehensive safety plan so that everything is in alignment with one another, increasing community relations, which we'll be tapping in Justin and their team on for enriched communication and transparency on processes. And then also, as Dr. Brown had mentioned, limiting the school safety officers' responses on site unless it is ultimately needed and appropriate for them to be on their campuses. So this is the work that we are hoping to continue this school year and for times to come. Some strategies specifically for investing in students and staff. So you have already heard the millions of dollars that have been invested in mental health professionals on our campuses. And one of the programs that we are looking into bringing back is the building out the safe passage programs. So this was a program in the Cabrillo area, and for whatever reasons, there's an opportunity to bring that back and explore how can we merge both staff, but also parent engagement in keeping our schools and our communities safe. And so some other areas, which was already listed in the presentation earlier, were the increased number of wellness center staff, as well as increased therapists on campus. So in addition to school safety officers, there is now a crisis mental health team that goes out to campuses when there is a crisis. So evaluating and expanding that program. So the area, which is going to take some time to get to, is the evaluations and culture shifts. This year, we're making a lot of investments and strategies to increase safety and reimagine safety for all students. And there's going to be a need for evaluation and evaluating how are these strategies being effective and where can we pivot. And so during this year and the years to come, we will be participating in a process where we evaluate all of the current policies and strategies that are being implemented and determine where the shifts need to be made. So some specific strategies to work towards our goal of abolishing these policies that are negatively impacting our students, having surveys on what's the possibility of removing the weapons from school safety officers, as well as having conversations and surveys around what is the need for school safety officers on campus, and could we replace them with other trained and professional individuals for our campus. And then with that, explore potential shifts to school safety and student supports department, and re-exploring or revisiting job descriptions, training manuals, and other related staffing tools that align with a new safety models. So to close out this roadmap, there's a lot of strategies, and today you started the day off with strategic planning. Many of these elements are similar to what's going on into a strategic planning process, but I want to hone in this conversation with this particular quote from Angela Davis. And it reads, "In order to move in the direction of something like transformative justice or restorative justice, we have to consider all of the conditions that lead to the creation of harm, rather than simply create a kind of cycle that leads from one violence to another." And so we're doing this transformative work to really evaluate how are we going to reimagine safety. It's not going to be easy. As Dr. Brown had mentioned, there have been hard conversations and disagreements, and that is what is needed. And so we're coming together jointly to do those hard and courageous conversations to bring about, to bring the needs to students. So I'm going to pass it over to Geraldine to close us out.
Good afternoon. I'm Geraldine Tatum, LBUSD parent, LBUSD alum. Thank you all for your presentation. We hope that in this presentation you've heard that this is a type of example, or is an example, of when community, parents, and the district can work together collaboratively. You saw the history. In that history, for those who are here, I hope you recognize the gaps. Like, what happened? Why was the work unfinished? Why from 2012 to 2022 we're having the same conversation? Want to say thank you for staff for being open to allowing us to sit at the table. If you see myself, Kim, Chris, we represent a diverse community of different voices, different backgrounds, different experiences. But the one thing about all of these communities and individuals that we represent is we want a safer LBUSD. To educators that are watching or parents that are watching, this is also part of your mission as well. Your voice hasn't been heard yet. There's an opportunity for it to be heard. Make sure that you're sharing your experiences with the district. We know that there were surveys that took place. We know that there were study focus groups that took place. Those were small. There's still an opportunity for your voice to be heard in this. For educators, parents, and community, we are partners in this. So please remember that. Did I forget anything? No? So again, thank you all. We hope that this time we finish the work and that we're not having this conversation 10 years from now. Thank you. And if there's any questions, right? So questions.
Great. Thank you all so much. Colleagues, we have about 20 minutes. So questions, comments, thoughts? Who wants to get us started? Dr. Baker, did you want to fill in some info?
I wanted to ask, first of all, thank you for your joint presentation and for the work that you've done together over the last year. I would be interested in having you expand a little bit on the pilot program that has taken place with the Guidance Center in the School Safety Office and how that is working, especially for a Board of Education who isn't always apprised of the day-to-day work in the district. It would be good for them to know, what does that look like that's very different than the past?
That was one of the bullets that I wished I would have highlighted. So thank you for tossing the ball back. We have several really wonderful partnerships with community mental health agencies that are in town. One is the Guidance Center. And this year we have contracted with the Guidance Center to have 2 psychiatric mobile response teams that are run inside the school district in partnership with them. 2 clinicians who take calls for circumstances prior to reaching out to law enforcement. So a circumstance where a student is in a psychiatric emergency that causes them to walk away from campus. We are able to call these 2 wonderful women who are clinicians to respond to that situation, care for the student, see them safely back to campus, outreach the family, connect them to resources that they need. They have been working in Long Beach Unified since January. We have some really exceptional early results and impact of their work. It's a model that we would like to continue and do more of, and we're very grateful to the Guidance Center for coming alongside us with a need that prevents us from having to involve other types of enforcement agencies in what is actually a mental health emergency, and allows us to connect families to resources that they will need ongoing to continue to support their children. So that's an example of an idea that was born out of creative thinking and allows us to be more supportive in the way that we reach for students who are struggling.
Dr. Benitez.
Thank you for the presentation and for the passion and effort and energy that goes into really difficult conversations that anchor this work. For me, the safety in schools conversation, I agree with the premise that there's work that's either unfinished or incomplete. But I do hope that we have a conversation in 5 years and 10 years, because I think it is important to continue reimagining what safety means, given that I think safety in schools takes on a different tone for some students. And maybe elaborate on that. Some students, school is their safe haven. So although we have made commitments in terms of resources and reprioritizing, supporting our students, it may be the only time of the day in some of our students' lives where they feel safe, given some of the trauma and issues around safety that they're facing, not just in school, but in our own neighborhoods and communities here in Long Beach. So the significance of safety for me in schools takes on a significantly more impactful tone, right? Particularly for those students that are struggling with issues of safety outside of school as well. So I think for me, I do have a question, Dr. Valizadeh, around the connection between education and policing, and some of the work that I also think our district needs to continue to do around educating our communities, students, parents, caregivers, guardians, on what we mean by school security and police and school safety officers, and what the implications of, as you noted in some of the data that you've collected, that although there isn't a direct correlation between a quote-unquote police presence and safety and security on our campuses, there are some thoughts about what that means, particularly for students of color, particularly for our schools that are in predominantly communities of color. All right, so Dr. Valizadeh, not to, I'm sure you could spend the whole rest of the afternoon here, but I think there is a component here that's either not understood or misunderstood in terms of the implications of policing, quote unquote policing, on school campuses vis-a-vis the context of our communities of color and the context of our neighborhoods that have disparate experiences with quote unquote police in our community. So could you elaborate a little bit about, I know you did not point to it as a correlation, but I do think there is some significance beyond there may or may not be a positive or indirect impact of having police, that there are some presumptions made by our communities and by our community members around what that impact is on schools.
I'm going to try my best to answer your question. I think what you're asking is for me to, what type of education is needed for our communities? Is that what your question is?
Vis-a-vis schools, right? Because I'm just going to say it.
Say it.
People think about police in very unique ways in our communities of color and in communities surrounding schools that are not predominantly communities of color.
Correct.
There are differences, just in real or perceived. There are different thoughts and ideas on what police in communities are. In the same way, but again, I'm lifting up, as folks think about what a school safety officer, what policing on campuses, and what security on campuses means. And again, you've referenced it, you've alluded to it in previous conversations and work. There's a difference of having metal detectors at schools than at the airport, right? There's a difference, both in terms of substantive, what's the purpose, what are the perceptions about that, what do they serve, right? And if we're associating these kinds of security cameras, fences, on our schools, there is a different context and implication than in other aspects of our community. So I want to lift that piece up.
Absolutely. So if we're just saying it like it is, then we have to actually have an admission, not an omission, of what the history of policing has meant for communities of color and for schools that have predominantly Black and brown students in them. So really understanding that the communities, well, they are pretty well trained in understanding their own experiences and their interactions with police. So it isn't very far-fetched for them to see that on their school campuses, when there is a police presence and the interactions feel a little bit more hostile, that this is a sort of that this is creating a culture that is just reproducing what they've been, the historical racial traumas that they've gone through in their own communities, and then it's just, school is just another system that is reproducing those instances, as opposed to other communities who may be used to seeing police at, concerts at the park, and they're giving the kids stickers, and it's just like, hey buddy, want to try riding on my truck. Those aren't necessarily the experiences that our Black and brown students are having regularly. So when those students come to campus, right, we're talking about higher socioeconomic backgrounds and white students, when they see police, they think, oh, you'll keep me safe. So the question here is really educating those folks who don't have those negative perceptions, because I think the communities who have these experiences that are negative with police are pretty well informed, and they see it reproduced on their high school, middle school campuses. It's the other communities who are coming in with their experiences of police are safe, police are great people, which I'm not saying that they aren't, but they are the ones who may need to be better informed and a little better educated on what police means for other communities and who's actually safe and who is not when we come to our campuses. I'm not sure if that helps to answer.
Yes. So now I'll ask. I wanted to hear that from an expert, right, so that I could ask my question, because having a lockdown at certain schools in our community means different things. Having backpack searches, right, may not be interpreted as policing in some parts of our community, yet in other communities, having backpack searches means something different, right, because of those communities' experiences with quote unquote policing techniques. So my question is this, and thank you for that. You shared everything that I was hoping, and it was me not articulating clearly the question,
No,
right? When we talk about school safety, I want to make sure that folks understand, and this is what I'm hearing from all of you, this is not just about, and I'm not trying to minimize or trivialize this, having school safety officers on campus or not, and their roles on campus or not. It is much more holistic as I'm hearing this conversation, right? So I'm wondering, what are those steps in the next steps that pose the most challenges from, again, the framework that you're presenting, right? Is it the policy part of it around making determinations about having arms in schools or not? Is it the professional development piece? Is it the partnership with community organizations around expanding and strengthening our restorative practices? Is it all of the above? I just want to get a sense of, from the next steps and the actions, what do we as a board need to consider in thinking through either policy and or our executive staff making recommendations on trainings and or prioritizing budgets in a particular direction, because it's an incomplete sort of, it's a lot, right? It's a lot that we've done. It's a lot that's remaining to do, but there is a difference between us passing a policy saying X, Y, Z versus all of the other things that are included in the school safety conversation.
Absolutely. I'd love to, I have a couple things I want to address, but I would like to hand this over to Mr. Chris Covington to respond to you. One thing I do want to respond to is when you mentioned, the metal detectors or going through the backpacks meaning different things. That was an excellent example. There's a quote, "I am not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am who I think you think I am." And it's very important that we understand what Du Bois referenced as a double consciousness, that so many students from these over-policed communities, so many of our Black and brown students, what they're entering when they're getting that backpack checked versus it's just another background check, it's just a metal detector. So really understanding how folks navigate and how you're going to respond to that interaction, right? And so that's one thing that's important. Another thing, before we get into all the policies and the different steps we need to get through, we have to get back to that vision. Whose safety matters, and what are the steps that we need to get to the vision where we can all be safe together, Black, brown, students with disabilities, white, all together as one. And if anyone feels discomfort in these conversations and they take some sort of a personal, emotion with this because their experience has been a certain way, they have cognitive dissonance about these conversations, then that is some inner work that has to be done as well. So before we really start making those policy changes, we have to actually dig into ourselves and the groups that we identify with and do some of that work prior, or it's just going to look like we're checking off a box. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Nusheen. First, I want to take a breath. We are all really tense over here. This is heart work, right? I am an expert in my own life. I am an expert as a Black mother. I am an expert as an educator. We all have expertise, right? So I just want to name that, not just Dr. V has expertise. We all have expertise. That was a bit much. Okay, we are experts at witnessing inequities. All of us in this room are experts at witnessing inequities, right? My heart is racing, so I want to acknowledge that, because that was a lot. And I think this is just the beginning of a conversation, and we're having it on a public front, right? Because folks are tuned in and watching this conversation. This is the modeling that we want to see in our district. We want to see these conversations where it's like, no, this is not working. This is what the superintendent says. These are the policies. How are they being implemented? This is what the policies the board is passing. How is it being implemented? I go all around the city, and everyone knows that I work closely with the district. I get a million questions about stuff. I go to Cal State Long Beach last night to watch a movie. I ran into a teacher sitting behind me. She starts talking to me about what's going on at her school. I don't get a break from this either. I get text messages from parents. I get text messages from teachers. I don't necessarily want this responsibility, but it's been given to me. It's been given to Jerlene, it's been given to Chris, and yes, it's been given to Dr. B as well, that, you know, we are moving this work forward whether we want to or not. And so all I'm asking is that you just meet us halfway. I don't want to have a philosophical conversation about what is safety and what do we mean by this and the tone of safety. No, cut the BS. We want to know, what will you do tomorrow? How will you implement your own safety plans? How will you ensure that each school site is at least publishing it on their website? It's a little thing. Who's checking on that? I remember doing my own research on school site councils for Dr. Baker. There were 8, I just randomly picked 8 schools. Didn't have anything on their website about school site council. And this is the board that gets thousands of dollars at every school. That's just one example. So at the end of the day, it's about implementation, right? Making sure that all the staff departments that are in, and I want to shout out Dr. Simon because she is doing a bomb job with SEL. But all of your departments should be working twice as hard as Dr. Simon's department. Knocking on doors, meeting students where they're at, meeting families. I told Dr. Baker and Dr. Brown last week that I was really embarrassed last weekend when I went to an event at the Maya Hotel. In our city, there was no Long Beach rep there. It was a statewide meeting. The superintendent of LA was there. There were no Long Beach reps there. I was embarrassed, actually. So we could philosophize all we want. At the end of the day, all we want as parents, I'm gonna wear my parent hat, not my researcher hat. All we want is for you all to put your money where your mouth is. The superintendent, the California superintendent, Tony Thurman, tripled money this year. Money is tripled. There is money. So why do I have a teacher telling me last night they cut tutoring at our school because it's not being used as much? Why do I have a teacher telling me this at another school, right? So we're hearing all of these in the district, which is in the community, which is the part that is frustrating for us because we know there's money there. Folks can be targeted and get the help they need. So I don't know what else we can do but bare our souls. Our students are suffering. It may not be my student, but it's somebody's student. It's 75% of us, Black students. It may or may not be mine in that 75%, depending on the year. But if you really want to make changes, there is easy ways to implement this stuff. This is not rocket science. Some of you got doctorate degrees. This is not hard work. Some of us do, some of us don't. Starting with one school site at a time, starting with the responsibilities of the principals, starting with the responsibilities of teachers. I do work with PTA on the DEI side of the house as well, right? So there's a lot that we're doing all at the same time. I feel like you all aren't understanding how much we are pushing from every single direction. Yes, it's not about metal detectors. It's not about school safety officers. It's about a holistic approach to our students feeling seen, feeling loved, feeling appreciated, and wanting to go to school. Do you know how many kids are like, my teacher doesn't care one way or another what I do? I struggle with my own son who gets no reprimand for being late. I'm like, how are you late to your class again? Does your teacher not say anything? Nope, she don't care. That's his response. That's the message we're sending. And one of the board members in LA said, we're normalizing this with black and brown kids. We're normalizing low I-ready scores. We're just normalizing it from year after year. So anyway, I'm sorry. I know I went off on a tangent there, but coming back to school safety, it's a holistic approach. It includes the funds we get for the black students. It includes all the work we do with the CAC. It includes all the different aspects of work we do to bring school safety as a holistic concept and educate all of us. Educate the parents, educate the students, and ultimately they have to feel like they belong to this campus. They're going to tear up the bathrooms because they don't feel like they belong. I belong to this campus. I belong to this district. I will put in extra hours because I feel like I belong. I want our students to feel like they belong. That is what we need.
Thank you, Dr. Tabari.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tabari. Just really quick point of order. Thank you for sharing all of that. I just want to do a quick time check-in.
Yeah.
We do have folks who are scheduled to present, I think, in about 4 minutes, according to the clock in the back. I want to talk to Dr. Baker and colleagues. If we give this, because I know there's a couple other folks who have questions, another at least 10 minutes. Is that, I know we've got folks in the back, so I just wanted to honor kind of coming to a place where we can talk about when we have the next opportunity to continue the conversation without cutting it short. So we'll go another 10, 12 minutes, colleagues, on this before we transition. So I just want to set that. Thank you.
In addition to what Dr. Sabari was sharing, the collaboration piece and what steps that we take forward, our campaign in partnership with the district, we have already set forth a monthly ongoing meeting to evaluate the specific strategies that were listed in this presentation, and also some that we didn't want to add in there because it would just be a laundry list of things that are going on. So we are going to be utilizing that space to identify areas of growth, and then we will be coming back, or at least the aspiration is to come back to school board and give an update on how have the strategies that we've implemented this year, how are they going, and what potential shifts we want to see forward. So today is a start of a conversation. It's a start of a public conversation, and we're inviting those who are watching and engaging in the space to participate. So one of the things that we did want to see forward is a community town hall on safety. And so that's something that is on our idea list, and so that's something that we could potentially work towards, and that's another way that we will be continuing the conversation. And so for school board members, you all vote, right, in unison on many of the policies that come forward, and also provide very influential ideas and investments for the district. And so one of the things that you all can do is have reimagining safety as a priority for you in the conversations that move forward, and identify what specific funding streams that we can bring to our school districts to move away from punitive school policing models and start to move us into a holistic model that centers students and staff supports. So there's some specific elements that you all can take, and it's the start of a great work, and we know that community wants this to happen yesterday. And together, through honest and courageous conversations, we're going to get to a point where we get to have all student staff needs met and have the reduction of calls for service and increase of student academics. At least that's our vision in working together. So that's some answers and contributions.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, I know you've been waiting.
Yep, thank you. First off, I just wanted to acknowledge all of the hard work in regards to man hours, but more importantly, the emotional equity that goes into this space. You guys highlighted a lot of the difficult situations that have occurred around safety in our district for the past 12 years. And I appreciate you guys setting the tone with the beginning of this conversation. All things considered, when I go through this presentation and we get to the slides that talk about the roadmap, you all were talking about the strategies on how we get to the strategies to move forward. Though I appreciate strategies, I think that I've been very clear from my position is that I like to see next steps and tangible, firm contributions to a topic. And so, though I appreciate these things in principle, I'd like to know what the next steps are from the district on what we plan to do to support these efforts.
Many of the things that are referenced here are already in the works. They began on August 19th with the full day conversation. I'll call it a conversation. It lasted 8 hours, but it was a conversation with all of our administrators, really bringing in the concepts that have been raised through our dialogue and bringing in the community perspective around shifting the idea of what is safe at school. That included a lot of detail around discipline guides and procedures, and this real need as we return from 2 years in a very pandemic-ridden circumstance, and we're back at school. This idea of really reiterating what expectations are to include how we will be together, how we will be in relationship with one another, how we will plan for and act around student and adult wellness, and really how we express care for one another. Because the thing that we didn't speak about in the research that is also true is that in settings where there is more care and connectedness for one another, those are places where people experience more safety. And that is really what all of our efforts, not just one effort, but all of our efforts together from all of the departments that are represented around the table. I appreciate Dr. Tabari's emotional and passionate response. And I think that what she shared emulates a lot of the ways in which our conversations have gone as we've spent 20 hours looking at each other's faces. And why I highlight that is that when we talk about school safety, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about everything. When we talk about equity, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about everything. And every experience that everyone brings to our schools, parents, community members, teachers, administrators, students, it's all everything. And so what's in front of us is everything. And our efforts are really to try to approximate the next right thing as often as we can. And what this process has really highlighted for me in a different way is that we can't do that without sitting in very uncomfortable conversations with our community. So I'm thankful to those that are here and to those whose voices they're representing. I don't know if that was next steps, Mr. Miller, but I really wanted to say that.
I appreciate that. For me, I'm looking for more tangible, practical components to what we'll do to support these efforts. I think that when we're talking about safety, and I'll agree with my colleague here and Dr. Benitez, when it comes to safety in particular, we want to reevaluate it fairly often. And so when I think about it as a cyclical process of strategize, action, reevaluate. And so as we take this cyclical process of strategizing, action, reevaluate, I think that this is the strategized piece. I want to know what the action will be. And then when will we be reevaluating that so we can go back to the strategy piece and so on and so forth. And so that's what I would be looking for, and I'd like to see more of that piece when we talk about school safety.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Otto.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge the presentations that were made. I think that they were very powerful. I think that safety is on everybody's minds. It's a shame that it's on everybody's minds about schools, because I agree with Dr. Benitez that there are a lot of people who feel very, very safe at schools, rightly or wrongly, and yet it's a haven. It's a place where people go, hopefully, to learn things, to better themselves, to better their communities, and I would like to think that the school district stands for that approach to things. The title of this presentation was "Let's Stay Safe Together." And I hear that, I understand that, I believe that that is a great aspirational goal that we should be spending time and money on. And in fact, we have been doing that because we have established not only wellness centers in all of our high schools that have, by all reports, been very, very successful. We've now expanded that to our middle schools, and we'll see how that works out. I expect that to be very, very successful too, because what it does is the full half of what's recommended here, and that is it puts students in contact with adults that will support them and value them and do it on an ongoing and a regular basis. I'm hoping when we come up with policies that we're going to get information about not only the types of harm that is being visited, because I know we talked about this as let's stay safe together, but then I heard a lot of conversation about the harm that's being suffered, and I'd like to be able to quantify and in a quality or quantifiable and another way to get the information out there about exactly what the harms are and the extent of what they are. I know many people all over this city who who would be very uncomfortable if they feel that students are unsafe, and they would be wanting to do things about that. I think that the police feel exactly the same way about that. They don't want people harmed. They, we on every meeting, almost every single meeting, have a report about somebody who's brought a weapon to campus or something that's happened on campus, and we have to take that into consideration when we plot what it is that we're doing. I applaud you for everything that you're doing, all the things that you've done. I think that it's a conversation that if we're gonna move this into policy language, needs to come out with, this is where we are. These are the things that are working. These are the things that are not working. These are the things that we think that we have to do, and these are the reasons why, based on the harm that is right now in our school districts. So,
may I make a comment? One thing that's been missing through this entire process has been the engagement from the board. The roles that those of us have played in engaging community, as Dr. Tabari expressed, is a burden that we didn't sign up for. We stepped into out of obligation and need. So when we talk about next steps, one of the next steps is we'd like for you all to be engaged in the conversation outside of this room. We know that Safer LBUSD has been part of the conversation because we've heard it come up in conversations at different meetings. So we know that today is not new. We know that you've known about the work. So please engage in this conversation with the communities that you represent so that you can hear for yourself what the need. Thank you, Dr. V, for your work, but the district pays Dr. V to do that work. She doesn't represent communities. She has to go out and seek out information. So we would like to ask if there's anything in this process as we move forward, before we ever get to our 5-year mark or 3-year mark, is that you're part of this conversation as well.
Okay. Ms. Craighead.
Well, Thank you for that point. And what I would like to do is just bring this conversation back around to something that Dr. Tabari said about, it's about our kids and seeing each of our kids for the individuals that they are. And this work is made possible not just because you, the panel before us, have answered a calling, but because every staff member, every board member has compassion, and we want to have this collaboration. We want to move forward because we want what's best for our kids. We want the same things, and I wanted to acknowledge that so that we can go forward knowing that we have that in common, that we're starting from the same starting place. And it's a matter of differences where we might not agree on every single point. We might not agree on our point of views because we're all individual. But when it comes right down to it, we are all in this room because we care about these kids and we want the best for the kids. And so we will be good listeners because that's what it takes to do right by our kids. So we will be good listeners, and that has been a part of the process. And so it's a matter of going forward from here.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, I just wanted, in terms of follow through, I appreciate the safety findings. I wanted to go back to that page. Ideas around dress code and ID are things that kids have been struggling with for as long as I have been a parent in this district. And again, it seems like, how are we still here having someone get called out for a sweatshirt or a dress code infraction when we really just want them to be in the classroom? So I would just ask our level offices just to take a peek at this between dress code and IDs, especially Dr. Lund Middle School, K-8s around the bullying issue. We're hearing that that is an issue. So when your administrators are talking about these big picture items and having those long conversations, that these are just some really pointed examples that are probably happening on their campus and ways to re-engage around that holistic feeling of how are we lifting this kid up? It happened again. We could have a structural conversation, but let's make sure this kid feels safe today, tomorrow, and when they come back to us without a stomach ache. So I understand that. So as we bring this to a close, I just want to thank you for bringing your incredibly, Dr. Baker.
I can wait if you're, I do want to share something, so if you.
So I'll just wrap my comments, and then if you want to finish up. I want to thank you for your decades, the four of you, of work in this district and in our community, and the lives that you've led in this community that have bring you here today, sharing your unique experiences that unfortunately are widespread experiences that many of our community feel that don't have the opportunity to voice or bring into these kinds of conversations and rooms. So I want to thank you for bringing your unique voices, but also the voices of those that we don't get a chance to talk to or who are unwilling to talk, or we haven't opened the door wide enough to allow them to come into the conversation. So I want to thank you for bringing those voices into the room and into the work that you've been doing with Dr. Brown and other staff members and Dr. Simon. So thank you, period, that part. I look forward to the ongoing conversations that you'll have with Dr. Brown as we get updated. I look forward to having ongoing conversations with you as well. And I think it is important as we're restructuring our board meetings and our agendas, Dr. Baker, to look at ways to have updates on a regular basis in the same way that we did the equity policy. So as we look at the suggestions and some of those pieces in the roadmap forward, really bringing, not necessarily in an oral report, but maybe an executive report that's made public around what some of the progress has been on those, so that the public can track how we're moving, if we're not moving. So I would bring that as some more continued next steps in terms of communication with the work. But again, grateful that you're with us today. Thank you.
I want to build on the same sentiments and thank you for what you've shared, your lived experience. And I want to say that oftentimes, and Dr. Tabari, you said this, that saying something in a boardroom is not the doing it. And you're exactly right. And we know that what happens in this boardroom with a senior team and a governance team that's committed to the same values and aspirations that you're talking about, that is the beginning of changing behavior. And so we have worked really hard of late to change the focus of board meetings, because when adult behaviors change in the boardroom, it is setting an example for our entire school district. And specifically, as I look around to this team before me, thank you for acknowledging Dr. Simon. And I want to acknowledge each of the members of the team who, as of this year, are activating on very different goals for student achievement, including supplemental goals beyond an all-student goal that centers Black students and their levels of achievement, that actually takes each of us to look at students' identity, their sense of belonging and agency, and specifically drilling down to look at our Black student data in that regard. Shifts in curriculum, accountability for schools across the system to hold schools accountable to changing the systems in their schools so that our Black students and our other students of color and our students with disabilities find greater success. An effort to change the commitment to students as we start this school year that also speaks to cultural assets and affirmations. And so each of us has an aspect of the work that we are committed to continuing to do with direction from our Board of Education. And I appreciate you standing with us, even when it feels like the lived experience has not matched up to what our aspirations are. We are a big system, and so I thank you for continuing to help us to have a different vision and to stand with us as we work every day to do better by our students. There are some specific things I think that are follow-up to your question, Mr. Miller, and I think Dr. Brown can return to you some of the activations of what the group has shared today that are in progress and that we will have more data on. So the implementation of the school safety data system will allow us to query demographics, as has been talked about. That we'll have data on the response team. That's a newer area of work. And so I think it would be good to put together a follow-through so that it's not just living in kind of ethereal, here are things we're activating on, but actually what is active and what are some of the ways that we'll try to measure the success of those new actions.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. Kerr.
Dr. Benitez, did you have something?
No, thank you.
Okay.
I echo.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. Yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break and be back. Thank you. Good afternoon. We are back after a quick break. We are here for facilities update. I think I am kicking it directly to Mr. Miranda. I appreciate your flexibility on the time this afternoon. Thank you.
All right, thank you for having us. So members of the board, Superintendent Baker, senior team, and our audience, always a pleasure to present our facilities updates and just what's been happening in the world of facilities and maintenance over the course of the summer primarily. But of course, we also want to tee up what's coming down the pipeline here with respect to capital facilities improvements. So right out the gate, I listed myself there as a presenter, but in the spirit of football season upon us, I'm going to call an audible. There's a few additional folks right to my right and left. So we have Mr. Alan Rising and Mr. Dave Van West from the maintenance side of the house. They're going to be here to speak to one particular slide, also be available for Q&A with respect to heat mitigation efforts.
Good afternoon.
So before us is our agenda. Customary for us to break this thing up into smaller digestible chunks, and that's what we've done this afternoon again. So as I often do, I'll start with a project and program update, just speaking primarily to Measure E, but also to a few other project specifics that we've been working on. Towards the tail end of that particular segment is when I'm going to bring Mr. Rising and Van West on board. Figure at that point we pause for a little bit of Q&A just on that particular subsection before jumping back in to finish up with furniture and master planning efforts. So project and program updates, a ton of highlights here, right? So as we often do, we like a little bit of show and tell, some pictures up here with respect to completed projects, and that's what we have before us this afternoon. So I listed 4 particular projects where we've wrapped up in its entirety or are very close to wrapping up construction efforts. So you see Hughes, Robinson, and Twain listed as complete. I'm singling out Wilson because we have a couple smaller things to finish up out there, yet we did list it in our completed project category. So by smaller items, I mean punch list work, some of the finish up cleanup efforts with contractors just tidying things up on the particular campus. You see a couple projects or images here pictured, and they really depict what our typical Measure E scope of work looks like, right? So some things you cannot see, the HVAC systems, the ductwork, all the infrastructure that goes in behind the scenes and above the ceiling grid, of course. But you do see a number of other things in terms of cosmetic type improvements that help our classroom learning environments. So pictured there, you see our classroom technology. So that's overhead projectors, surfaces to be able to project on, of course, a lot of natural light coming into these classrooms, LED lighting, new ceilings. You see new flooring pictured there as well. What you don't see on this particular image is our new furniture, which I'll speak to a little later, and that's only because our phase 1 started with transitional kinder and kinder rooms alone. We'll circle back on middle schools, elementary schools, and high schools in these future phases, of course. Active construction, quite a few projects where we have shovels in the ground and construction crews on site. I'll speak primarily to the photos here, right? So what you see pictured at the left is Jordan High School's phase 2B. In particular, what you see is the final piece of steel going up. So thank you to Board Member Kerr, Dr. Baker for joining us out there as well, getting the opportunity to sign off on that final beam before it was erected as part of this structure.
Is that them too on top of that beam? Is that what I'm hearing here, Mr. Miranda?
Safety first. We made sure this beam was off to the side. Even then, our construction crew and inspector was keeping a close eye on us before anybody even dared step foot onto the construction site.
Those are amazing steel workers doing that work, just to clarify.
So incredible project. It's taking shape. You see the full steel frame up and in place now if you were to drive up and down this campus. We're really excited to keep this project moving forward, of course. There's other projects listed, and again, I'll speak primarily to the ones that are pictured. So what you see at the center there is homes. As promised and as requested by the board, I'm going to continue to show these images, right? So when it's kind of what I would call the more boring photos, they're very exciting for our district, right? So this work and the continued efforts to embark on HVAC improvements across all of our campuses is of the utmost importance. What you see there is the kitchen cafeteria space over at Homes. So a lot of the ductwork going in, construction workers working hard to get things done. It's also customary for us to often embark on our cafeteria and kitchen type work in particular over the course of the summer stretches. So just to minimize the disruption to school campuses, to our nutrition services division as well. There are cases where we jump in with, again, calling other audibles just in terms of different meal plans. But as best we can, we try and embark and complete that work over the course of the summer at all campuses. And then pictured to the far right is Bancroft. We selected this particular image just to highlight the fact that within our scope of work is also accessibility requirements and improvements, right? So what you see pictured there, kind of the front entry to the auditorium on this particular campus, we had an existing stairway. We're embarking on an improvement to add a ramp feature so that everybody can access these same facilities across the district. Another request of the board, I believe just one presentation segment ago, was for us to circle back and include as part of our facilities updates, updates with respect to campus safety and sustainability. So that's what I'm looking to do this afternoon as well. We listed one particular slide here before you that highlights some of the improvements that are underway right now, some actually that completed this summer and some that are coming down the pipeline here relatively soon. So EVSS Phase 2, and just for clarification's sake, EVSS, Electronic Visitor Screening System. It's what you see pictured there on the left. I believe that's Longfellow Elementary that's pictured. And you see a number of improvements that our district embarked on some time ago, right? So making sure we have perimeter fencing and secure campuses across the board, having a single point of entry to each particular campus as well, and having that buzz-in system that of course protects everybody on a campus. So making sure that we know who's stepping foot on campus as being of the utmost importance. Phase 2 includes different spaces. So we know within our campuses we have programs such as Head Start and CDC. Often those particular programs are in a different location on a campus, right? In many cases they're off of another perimeter fence, sometimes close to a perimeter gate. We know it does behoove us as a district, and especially for our parent community, to be able to have easier access to do drop-off and pick-up for those particular kiddos. So we're looking at those particular projects as we speak. In many cases, what we've heard from our customers is, there's the before school drop-off and pickups, there's the after school drop-off and pickups. Sometimes those windows fall outside of our school hours, right? So an attempt to buzz in to pick up a kiddo in the back of the campus for a CDC program or Head Start program might result in nobody in the office yet to buzz them in, right? So we're looking at these secondary measures, so that's why we call this EVSS Phase 2. Security cameras, it's one where we're actually trailing. We look to issue an RFP for what we call the second phase of security camera installs in the district as well, primarily at secondary schools at this point. Been bogged down with a lot of projects, a lot of summer requirements, so we do plan on issuing this RFP in the next month or so, and that'll get the ball rolling with respect to those particular projects. Telecom and wireless access points are projects we've actually worked very closely on in collaboration with our TISB department. So they spearheaded the planning efforts, really developed the ideas and the scope of work. And on the facility side of the house, our project managers are working through the implementation stage, of course. And that's our bread and butter. We're good at implementing projects and executing projects, so just working hand in hand with the other side of the house there. Telecom, primarily a phone system update, right? So having a consistent phone system across the district, really for ease of use, ease of customer service, helps us, of course, on the campus safety front as well, because we need to be able to pick up the phone and have something that works in every particular space out there. With wireless access points, you may have seen this already because we publicized via social media, but over 5,000 wireless access points that were installed this summer in classrooms. That was a heavy lift. It was done, so every classroom now has a new wireless access point. We're still working as we speak on the last 100 or 200 or so. These are primarily for spaces that are non-classrooms. So think spaces just kind of outside and, that would give remote access in a quad or courtyard or just outside of the campus perimeter. So think exterior spaces that are the only ones that are outstanding at this point. And then electronic door locks, you actually see one pictured there. And we actually selected the elevator to show, right? Because we've highlighted photos in the past of classrooms. And of course, we've included electronic door locks for site access control into buildings and one per classroom as well. But we also included it for elevator type features. And this again helps us in terms of site access control. I think I've mentioned this before, but every one of our ID badges will double as your key card. And that's what you see there actually. That's one of our staff members using their ID badge or key card to be able to access and test this elevator. I wanted to reference this particular project this afternoon as well. Because a few months back, we alluded to the fact that we may have some struggles in terms of supply chain issues, labor force, just being limited out there as well. And then, of course, long lead times for certain materials. And that's something we've experienced on this particular project as well. So we did finish up our work over at 2 of our pilot sites. That's Muir and Bigsby. Yet we're a little behind schedule on Jefferson and Robinson, which are the other 2 pilot sites that we had identified. And that's primarily not necessarily the door lock mechanism itself. It's the chips. It's anything computer-based these days is on an extreme back order. So we're going to continue to work with our vendors and partners to better identify timelines going forward. But that's an issue right now, just in terms of the network accessibility and tie-in for these type of systems. A few more slides, and then I'll turn this over to Alan. So, planned projects. Always want to tease just what else is coming down the pipeline. We have 2 particular slides here, one for the 23-24 school year, another one for the 24-25 school year, and you see just a full slate of projects. Another batch of projects in terms of HVAC and modernization scope of work, and you'll see the same pictured on the next slide. And then a couple other different projects, right? So aquatic centers projects that we've been talking about for some time. The turf field over at Avalon, of course, that project's progressing and going well in terms of their HVAC updates. But the next project in line for Avalon is, in fact, the turf field, tentatively scheduled to start early next calendar year, I should say. In 24-25, you see another, full slate of projects. So Millikan, Stanford, and Washington listed for HVAC modernization scope of work, a couple athletic-based projects. And really what I wanted to highlight here is 2 particular things. One, with every one of these project efforts that we've identified to go into implementation and execution stage in these given years, we engage in the services of architects and engineers a few years before then, right? So just to be able to, these projects take a while to come to fruition is what I wanted to emphasize. So, for Millikan, for example, that project is slated to break ground and start construction in 24-25. We've been working with that particular architect for the good part of a year, right? So our architect and engineering partners, work hard on engineering the systems that are appropriately fit and sized for these particular campuses and spaces. The design and engineering effort can often take up to a year, if not longer. The state architect approval and review process often takes the better part of 6 months, if not longer. We then get into, of course, a bid phase where we want to be transparent in that particular process and entertain bids from a number of different stakeholders and entities. So, we're talking, a year and 3 quarters into the process before we have shovels in the ground, right? Construction then can take upwards of a year, if not 2 years, just depending on the project size and complexity. As a point of reference, we've had projects, Robinson's a good example, that took close to a year. Wilson's another great example. That one took, 26 months or so, right? So as you have the larger scale projects, limitations with respect to interim housing, just being able to shuffle kids on the campus itself, limitations in terms of supply chain issues, long lead times for materials as well. We have these projects before us that take the better part of 2.5 or 3 years. I say that just to tee up really the next part of the conversation. So we've been looking long and hard, and we're going to continue to take a deeper dive in terms of exploring the feasibility and viability of perhaps re-baselining our program at this point in time. So we've done quite a bit of work. There's a number of projects that are currently in the hopper in terms of their particular timelines for implementation. We also know there's projects that are still scheduled to occur several years out, right? So as you get into those projects in what we would deem phase 10 through 13 of our building program, we want to take a deeper dive at those particular projects to identify if, in fact, we can re-baseline and expedite some of those particular efforts on the HVAC and modernization front. So I wanted to allude to that particular piece now. Wanted to make sure I tee up the fact that those projects still take a good chunk of time, right? So if we were to engage in architect and engineering services, even on a project that was scheduled to take place, in the out years, it's a chunk of time before we start to see construction efforts on those particular projects. With that, I'll have Alan speak to this slide, and then we can pause for questions, or we can take a question or two now.
Just a quick clarification. Sure. Like the natatorium conversions, is there a universal use? So the schools that are going to convert their nats to something, does each school get to decide what they're going to do with it, or are we doing a similar thing across schools?
The only similarity is that we're filling the hole, right? So where we had a pool complex, we're going to go in and fill the hole and just kind of start with a blank slate. The end result, though, the outcome of each particular facilities in terms of the repurpose does differ on a school-by-school basis, just based on other facility needs they have and program needs.
Great, thank you.
All right, okay. So Dave did a good job of kind of keying up what we want to talk next about, which is some of the concerns that we've been hearing, that we've all been hearing from our community related to some of the extreme heat conditions that we've seen at the start of school. I'm sure you've all been receiving those same communications that I have from our community about what can be done at our district level to really address some of those more immediate needs. We have approximately 20 sites, give or take, that currently are not have not yet been upgraded with our Measure E program. I kind of work with Dave to say we're a little bit of a victim of our own success of having completed 9 phases of work in our bond program, and we still have more to go. So we really want to look closely at these schools to make sure that we address them. It's also important to understand, as we identified in our facilities master plan, that the bulk of these schools are more than 60 years old across our district, which creates levels of challenges that we have in even what we can do at a school site to be able to address some of the core needs. Clearly, each of these school sites need a major modernization, which is on schedule and is coming. We are looking at that bond schedule to find ways in which we can reorganize potentially the schedule to be able to prioritize the HVAC work, to be able to move that work forward in the schedule. But it's always somewhat of a zero-sum game, right? In that if we move one up, then we move one back, and we look for other ways that we can do things that potentially save funds or allow us to be more efficient with the work we're doing. So our intent would be to really look at that closely and potentially in the future bring forward some recommendations for rebaselining. But there are some more kind of simple things that we can do to help provide some level of mitigation, and I listed a few here that I was really going to talk to the board about and our community about. Our maintenance teams have been activated since the big heat wave to really look at keeping our schools operational. A lot of the systems we have out there are old and they're approaching the end of life. They've been doing a lot of great work in keeping the systems that we have operational, but also addressing those school sites that don't have AC. We've put out several orders for box fans and pedestal fans. We're providing those to school sites as we speak. What that does is it allows us to have some level of cross ventilation, be able to bring air into some of those large hallways, those interior hallways that we have in school sites, and provide fans in individual classrooms to get some of that hot air to be ejected out of those open windows and out into the atmosphere to help create some level of ventilation. Again, these are some of the simple things that we're doing. That is in progress. We have our teams out at school sites assessing areas and opportunities where we can do that. Other simple things that we're doing is window coverings. That glaring heat that is allowed to come into classrooms through the inefficient window systems that we have in our older buildings. Really looking closely at our window blinds and our installing window blinds in areas where they don't have them, or repairing, improving the window blinds in areas where schools have them and maybe they don't work, they're not able to close them, or there's some way that they can, to keep that sun out, so some way that they have the ability to keep that out. Again, our maintenance teams have been out and been activated out at school sites looking at that work. Lastly, or I shouldn't say lastly, but in addition, we're also looking at the possibility of installing portable temporary window air conditioning systems in classrooms where we can. This is one that I think creates the most challenges for us. As I had said, most of our schools are in that 60-year plus range. That's the average age. So we're out assessing the ability for our electrical systems to handle the increase of multiple window units that would be able to provide cool air into our classrooms. We're very concerned because we will find situations where certain schools can potentially be upgraded, but other schools may not be able to be upgraded. In addition to that, we may find situations where individual buildings at school sites may be able to be upgraded, but other buildings at that school site, due to their age and the electrical service into those buildings may not be able to handle the additional load of air conditioning systems. We're currently assessing that now. We have maintenance teams out going to site by site and evaluating those electrical systems now, with the intent of us purchasing window units and getting those installed as quickly as possible ahead of what is surely coming, the next heat wave that will be coming at us. So in addition to that, we are also installing new water bottle filling stations at most of our school sites. We currently are working on what we call phase 1, which is about 20 water bottle stations at 6 sites. Those are actually in construction and very, very nearing completion. I think we just have some cleanup work, as David said, some punch list work on that phase. Tomorrow night's agenda has the award of a contract for phases 2 and 3, which totals 46 stations at 14 additional sites. As soon as that is awarded from the board, we'll begin working on that, and we expect to have that done by this fall, to have all of those water bottle stations completed at those sites. We have future phases that we'll be moving through ultimately to engage in all sites to ensure that they have the availability of clean drinking water at each building and at each site, adequate to be able to allow students to have that hydration. So in addition to that, we also have a shade structure program. The shade structure program was where we targeted some of our ESSER funds, the ability to create outdoor opportunities where children have abilities for shade. So we're looking at that in 3 different phases. This is a little bit more complicated because it does require state approval, so we're going through the DSA approval process. Phase 1 has been approved and is currently in bidding as we speak. We expect to have those awarded and start in construction by the end of October, with the intent of having those completed sometime by the fall, by November, early December, having those completed. We're also working on designs for our next phases. In total, we have exactly 79 shade structures that we'll be installing at each of our schools to help mitigate some outdoor heat and create opportunities for children to have cool spaces outside, to respites from the hot sun at school sites.
And
So
before you go on, I have a quick question about the shade covers.
Sure.
Are we talking shade covers for lunch bench area, or shade covers that classrooms can kind of cycle through if they want relief from the hot classrooms? Can you be specific about the shade covers?
Yeah, so the shade structures will vary at each individual site. In some cases, school sites either don't have any shade structures under their lunch areas, or have inadequate areas for shade in their lunch area. In other times, we've actually put them out on the playground area so that we can create cool zones on some of those big hot asphalt islands that we have at our school sites. So it very much varies, and it's really dependent on the needs of the individual site that we're trying to make the best use of these structures to meet their needs.
No, I'll go ahead and let you finish, and then we'll do questions at the end.
Got it. So in the end, there's a lot of work happening. There's a lot of efforts that are being made. We understand, from a community perspective, we understand the concerns that are out there. We don't take lightly the need to provide a healthy space for children and teachers to work in. We're doing what we can, but we recognize that we have some old schools that are on track to be modernized in the fairly near future. So we're doing as many efforts as we can to ensure that we address those concerns that are coming in from our school sites.
Okay, so we'll take a pause here, and questions, colleagues. Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've been patiently waiting. So first off, this is going to sound a little weird here, so don't judge me. But I get really excited when I see you guys. I think, I don't know what it is. I think that the presentations are often talking about what's going on behind the scenes to create environments of success for our students, right? And so all things considered, I've just been impressed with the presentations, the information that you provide. May not have always agreed, but I just really always have been very much appreciative of the level of detail and information that you guys provide. So kudos. With that said, One of the things that you all brought up, we're talking about upcoming construction schedules, and you knew that I was going to have a little something to say about that, as there was a previous presentation, if I'm not mistaken, that talked about the ages and last time construction had occurred on some of the campuses, and I remember the presentation, and I remember some of our, I would say, let's say some of our campuses that just need a little bit more love, and one of which is on the latter half of our schedule in regards to the construction timeline, and it just gave me cause for pause. Is I know that you said that there is the potential of movement, and you guys have been a victim of your own success, and so I'd like to challenge us to just take a look at that list, those campuses in particular, and see what we can do to support some of our campuses that haven't seen construction for some years now. As without highlighting the school in particular, just know that there's a campus that I can clearly see could use some good LOVE. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Dr. Benitez?
Not anything to do with our first president of the United States, is it, Mr. Miller?
If I had to hint towards it, let's just say it rhymes with Squashington.
What was that?
Thank you to the entire team. Mr. Risen, although in your position description, I know it doesn't have inspire confidence in there, I would love to follow up on the difficulties that we were facing just system-wide with this extreme heat, right? And I'm getting the impression that none of the options or things that we explored were feasible given the urgency of time of deploying both resources, but even if we had unlimited resources, just the structural deficits of our district, you know, shade structures, we got to go through approval, you mentioned. We can't just, you know, go buy 1,000 ACs and plug them in. Some schools don't have locations where we could rotate efficiently. You know, although water bottle filling stations are coming up, you know, it's sort of, you know, it'll be helpful in the future, but didn't help us in the last 2 weeks. So not to put the team on the spot, but do we not normally do kind of these feasibility assessments for us to have known, hey, the next time we get a major heat wave going on, these are some of the things that we'll be able to mobilize and allocate, and or was it just a perfect storm where we just didn't have capacity to respond expeditiously and to then, again, address all of the concerns that came out of the heat wave? And I'm saying this both because I'm curious, but also given the amount of public inquiry and in some cases outrage, you know, everybody was throwing out like 10 great ideas. Why don't you do this? Why don't I donate that? Why doesn't each principal go out and purchase this? So I'm trying to juxtapose it with what you just shared, Alan. So can you speak more to, one, did this just completely catch us off guard? And or even if we had been ready, you know, given the structural deficits, is it completely out of our hands here, Alan?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think anybody was ready for the first 2 weeks of school to be 105 degrees plus, right? And I think that we knew that class, traditionally, we get some heat waves at the beginning of the school year, but I don't think we're quite ready for the length and severity that heat wave hit us. As far as knowing the capacity of our school sites, we've got a pretty good handle on that. David and his team in facilities and our team in our maintenance department recently completed an entire facilities master plan where we looked deeply at our school sites. So we fully understood the limitations of what we had available at our school site to be able to do things like install, I mean, I wish it was just 1,000, it's probably going to be more than that, right? To install that many of air conditioning units. we really had never been asked to do that in the past. Installing air conditioning was something that we looked at in a more holistic, sustainable model where we're actually doing a full modernization at school sites as opposed to doing temporary units. I think it's important to remember that for many years we didn't even have the funding or the ability to put in that number of units at our school sites. So to say that we were caught off guard, I don't think really accurately reflects that. I think we just weren't ready for the length and severity of that type of heat wave that hit us. As we move forward, though, we definitely have looked closely at, do we have action plans together? Do we know what we're going to do? Are we prepared with some of the things that we can be prepared with in order to have those readily available so we can get those out to school sites? And again, as we said, really looking closely at the way that we're doing things to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible with how we're putting in air conditioning at our school sites so we can hopefully get these last few phases of Measure E done as quickly as possible so that we can really address that issue and put that issue to bed. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Megan, I'm sorry to cut you off. There was one more question that I had. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna let them go first, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Craighead.
Yes, thank you. Are we also looking at maintenance as it relates to trees? Because I know sometimes in the past, the trees have been trimmed at a time when it's very inconvenient as far as providing shade when, at the beginning of school when we get, we typically get a heat wave. So are we looking at the tree trimming schedule and maybe even the possibility of adding misters somewhere on the playground or shade covers over the lunch benches, something like that, where there would be some sort of relief for our students and teachers who are overheated? Because I know that was also one of the suggestions coming forward by parents.
Yeah. So the misters is definitely something we can look at. We haven't looked into that yet, so we could definitely explore that possibility. Trees are kind of a little bit of a different answer in that when you think about the number of school sites we have and the thousands of trees that we maintain, we trim those on essentially what amounts to a 7-year cycle. Every tree we try to get to every 7 years to do a certain level of trimming. So we just have a schedule. So we can go back and we can look at that. We try to get as many of those trees trimmed as we can during those summer periods, which probably results in trees being trimmed when they come back from school and looking as if our timing was off. But logistically, it makes sense when children are not around and we have these opportunities to be able to bring heavy equipment into school sites and lifts and those kind of things to be able to get some of that work done. So we can definitely look at that as we move forward to see if there's some better scheduling we can do and when we do the trimming.
Okay, Mr. Miller.
This question is actually a lot easier. You were talking about this slide here, the campus safety and technology projects, and you were telling us about the electronic door locks. On that slide, you listed a number of different projects, one of which I thought just got my ears perked up here, was around the security cameras. And you said it's predominantly at the secondary schools. How far away in regards to an implementation timeline do you think we are from that?
It's a couple of factors come into play on that timeline, right? So just in terms of our timeline with respect to issuing an RFP, getting responses, evaluations, and selections, that's likely in the next 3 to 4 month window.
Okay.
Implementation will primarily center around availability of the product, right? So this is another one of those areas with respect to technology, equipment, and in some cases, even our telecom project was another, right? Where we just saw constant delay after delay after delay. So I'm a little hesitant to give a time frame there. If the materials were readily available, these are the type of projects we can embark on and finish over a summer stretch.
Yeah.
Right? Provided they're available.
Gotcha. Yeah, and for me, once again, when I just think about us making sure that we continue to keep our campuses to the, let's call it premier modernization as we can keep it to, I almost look at cameras being in on our campuses almost as a standard. And so to hear that there are some of our campuses that are still behind in that process, I just wanted to make sure that we have that at least on the forefront of our planning process.
So I'd say twofold: identified as a particular project here, also identified in the facility master plan Alan alluded to. So that does become part of our base scope going forward.
Good. Glad to hear it.
And in many cases, and correct me if I'm wrong, in many cases, it's not original cameras, it's replacement and upgrading of security cameras. It's not original installation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I just had a couple questions. I appreciate what I'm hearing you say is you're going to look at the scheduling of the remainder of the projects around HVAC to see if there is not just opportunity. I mean, there's lots of factors that go into that, including having to temporarily house students at other campuses, as well as I know Yumi would talk to us about a whole piece around when we issue bonds and having a cash flow to actually pay for projects. That it's multifaceted, so I appreciate that you're going to take a look at that for some adjustments that can be made while still having a cash flow from bond sales to do that. And it's so funny because when y'all sit in front of us, it's the one time that we all start talking about our areas that we represent. Like, we are all about, they are all of our schools and all of our students, but then we sit here and Squashington over there is going to talk. And I will very honestly say it, as you look at that adjustment schedule, I would implore you to not do anything that would delay any of the work that's scheduled to happen to Jordan, who has been perpetually under construction for the last 8 years. So we know how it bothers lots of families when their schools are under construction. So the North Long Beach community and our Jordan community has been under constant construction for 8 years. So to please take that into consideration as you look at adjustments to that schedule. And the only other thing I'll offer, I appreciate that we're going to build in some water bottle stations as permanent, but I know at different places, concert venues, Hollywood Bowl, I was just there, they have industrial water bottle stations that I think you can hook to a water source that perhaps, if it's not time enough, maybe there's an opportunity to potentially rent something like that for campuses that we think might need additional access to filling water bottles for a potential heat wave. Just as kind of that interim thing. And I know people have talked about generators. And I still remember when I don't even remember what the school was when I was a parent, they bought lots of window ACs for a school and they put them in and they blew out the electricity in the whole building. So that's a real thing that we've had experience with in some of our older schools. So being very mindful of what that is, but also the idea of generators to do that work also comes with emissions and noise and all of those other things that potentially may impact students and learning while they're in the classroom. So I appreciate the complexity of the issue and how you're looking at it, and look forward to, again, not necessarily a face-to-face update, but an update through Dr. Baker on ways we can continue to support students and families.
For the record, I didn't say any of my schools by name. I might have hinted.
Oh, I said Jordan. I did. Ms. Craighead.
You mentioned something that made me think of a public comment this morning about battery-operated AC units. And I'm just wondering if that's something that you've been aware of or have looked into at all?
Yeah, we're aware of the battery-operated units. Typically, those do not have the capacity that we need in order to cool a classroom space that would be greater than 1,000 square feet of classroom space with upwards of 36 young children that would be in the space with all of the other what we call load, which is the computer systems and Chromebooks and all the other things that are in the classroom that generate heat. We typically see that we need some of the larger sized window air conditioning systems to even be able to make any meaningful difference inside of our classrooms. So the battery ones really don't quite meet that demand need.
Mr. Rada, do you have a question?
No, but I have a comment, and that is, I know you guys are looking into every possibility, and you know more about these things than I'll ever know, thank goodness. I think you're doing a great job with it. What the situation with the heat a couple weeks ago reminded me of was, we have a bond measure on the ballot on November 8th. And if there's any better reason to vote for that bond measure was what the number of the emails that I got from people in my area and other areas around town to show that we have old schools, that they need improvements, that we're a great school district, but we are an old school district, and we need to people to connect the dots and realize that they need to vote for this bond measure in order to make our schools modern. And so I hope that message gets out from all of us.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next piece, and I will do a time check with y'all as well. About 15, 20 minutes out.
Absolutely. I think
Thank
I
you.
can move through this piece particularly quick. So furniture replacement effort, switching gears. So I'm highlighting here just a few notes from phase one. And again, phase one was really focused in on TK and K spaces district-wide. So think every elementary campus out there. We were spread thin, not in terms of number of total classrooms, rather total number of sites. So our particular partner on this project did a stand-up job in terms of delivering and executing on this phase. Getting all the furniture in and out of these spaces within a 30-day window was just amazing. Alan and I visited a couple sites just to see it in progress, and they had a good-sized team out there on each particular campus. The logistical issues were difficult, right, in terms of pickup and drop-off with large-scale trucks on these campuses as well. It was just amazing to see, and equally amazing to see the finished product, right? So I know several of you have been to those particular elementary sites and TK and K spaces. It's a game changer in terms of those learning spaces. One of the other items I was asked to address was sustainability, and I figured I would do it here. And you may see me do this for the first time ever. I'm going to read off a slide. So, one and only time. So in terms of sustainability, and this is just one of my favorite facts and figures, so I want to make sure I don't butcher it. So 200 tons of waste diverted from the landfill, carbon offset equivalent to conserving 85,000 gallons of gasoline. That's just for this phase, by the way. So that's for phase one. When you map it out and go to the project in its entirety, which is 9 total phases, you can do a simple multiplier of 10 there. So you can gauge in terms of what we're diverting from the landfill, what we're going to save in terms of an equivalent offset is going to be amazing. Our furniture, in terms of the older surplus furniture that we're getting off-site, it's already making its way to different schools and different environments, which is amazing. So roughly 1/3 of it was recycled, right? It was just recycled into different components. 2/3 was repurposed and is in different educational environments as we speak. So some of it to a few neighboring districts, some of it to Habitat for Humanity, and it's in other states within our country, some as far as El Salvador, right? So our older furniture is in continued use going forward, which is just amazing. Up next, so I teased the fact that this is a 9-phase project. I think I previously hinted at the fact that our winter, spring, and fall phases are smaller chunks, right? Because school is in session and we can only embark on so many projects at a given time. So for those particular phases, you'll see school sites listed in the neighborhood of a number of 5 to 7, I would say. What you see listed for phase 2 in the winter phase is a number of elementary sites, and that's primarily because we're still making a few decisions on the secondary furniture that we've selected, in particular with the specialty spaces is what I would call it. So we know our game plan with respect to a standard core classroom, yet there's the special ed environments, there's the career tech spaces, the science labs. There's just a little more feedback we need to secure now that our educators are all back in session, right? So we'll make sure we iron those out and hit the ground running, starting with secondary schools as early as phase 3, and then we'll see several secondary schools listed over the summer phases in particular. Our procurement efforts. So I kind of teed this up for myself. So really over the course of the last 6 months, a ton of activities in terms of the planning efforts that our team undertook. So we mocked up a number of different classrooms spread out across the district. We hosted a number of different open house events and invited really our general population and public, students and staff to come over. There was a decent turnout, over 150 individuals that came over to our open house events. We took good notes, just in terms of what their feedback looked like. And they were not shy, right? So they told us what they wanted to see going forward. They told us what they did not want to see going forward as well. And I'll highlight some of that next. The survey was really successful as well. So over 200 responses to the survey we put out. Because we know some of the folks just could not attend the open houses, the forums we hosted for them to kick the tires on these products, firsthand. But the survey was in fact very helpful as well. So what did we hear? A number of things. Really what we heard is several of the key words and phrases we had heard previously. We want flexibility, we want mobility, functionality, and durability. There was a definite preference for what we started calling the beach-inspired color themes, right? So kind of the more neutrals and stuff. I actually have a few pictures to show in a bit. We heard loud and clear from our educators that they want the flexibility to have different heights for their desk, right? So in some cases they're sitting down, they're doing lesson planning. In other cases they're up in more of a podium type setting. So we heard them loud and clear there as well. Casters was an item that there was some division on. Roughly 50-50 in terms of the feedback, but we have a solution there. So several of the suppliers and vendors we're working with have tables and desks and chairs that come with the casters, but with a few, pushes of a button, we can get the casters off, right? So across any given school set or classroom, we have that flexibility to take casters on or off, right? So we're in good shape going forward there. Here's a few pictures, so just a little bit of the show and tell. You see some of the images here. Again, you see the beach-inspired theme, some of the blues, some of the neutrals, kind of the sand-type colors. Definitely standardizing in terms of desk and chairs and really giving us the ability to move things around as kids move around. So as enrollment shifts happen from one school to another or from year to year, we can shift furniture from one particular campus to another as well as we're standardizing there. You see a few soft seating options and just different seatings, the wobble stool and so forth. These are requests that came through directly from our educators and students. Next slide really just highlights the educator space. So instead of one particular station that has that stand-up, sit-down option, we're really providing them two different stations. Again, with ease, each of these gives us the ability and flexibility to kind of move up or down on demand. What we heard from the secondary schools, or really what we've heard so far, really matches up for the most part with what we heard from our elementary educators and students. Flexibility, mobility, and so forth. The color themes seem to be matching up, seem to be more desire for the casters in this particular category. I'd say the one major difference here was the interest in standing height options for student desk. So what we envision going forward is a mix, right? So in any particular secondary classroom setting, you could have some sit-down type stations mixed in with some stand-up stations towards the perimeter of the room, perhaps. And again, just a few images here to show what it looks like, really highlighting that beach color theme. You see the casters, kind of wheels on each of these stations just to give us the flexibility to move things in and around the classroom as best we can. And here's our teacher stations. Last but not least, just a brief update with where we've left off on the facility master plan. So I was before the board just a few months back. Thank you again for the adoption of the facility master plan that really guides us going forward in terms of our capital improvement needs and efforts. There's a few follow-up areas though. So as we took a deeper dive, we actually realized we needed to take an even deeper dive in a couple segments in particular. So early childhood education, we've been working very closely with Brian Moskovitz and his team. Cindy Young, Sarah Forrester, Lachelle Diggs. We've had a couple sessions to date. We have a couple more on the calendar because we really want to get into the specifics with respect to the needs of every individual campus. And then equally so for Pauley High School. So, we took a deep dive in terms of campus needs, developed 10 particular project priority buckets within the master plan, and I spoke to every one of those buckets not too long ago. Really what we saw right out the gate is just at Pauley High School alone, I think they're checking off at least 4 or 5 of those buckets, right, in terms of needs going forward. So again, we just figure it's time to take a deeper dive in those 2 areas. So what you see here, it's really just one slide, just to highlight and tee up the conversation for me. This is directly from our facility master plan, this particular image, and it's Riley. So what we know is on any given campus, we could see a mixed bag in terms of how to best address early childhood education, for TK needs, for pre-K needs on each particular campus. Here what you see pictured really towards the bottom left side of the image is an existing classroom wing, currently houses kinder, first and second grade, I believe, in terms of the classroom use to date. But we took one particular concept, and one vision was, what if we just kind of repurpose that particular building, right? Could we, in fact, demo some walls? Could we create larger classrooms? We know with our early learners, we need close proximity to play space, and play space that's age appropriate. We definitely desire close proximity to the front office, just to be able to access nurses and so forth. That close proximity, if not within the classroom itself, to the smaller toilets and restroom fixtures, right? And then, of course, a drop-off zone where we can capture that. So here we pictured one, right? We know with the smaller kiddos, they're not dropped off at the curb and sent on their way. There's going to be some hand-holding and walking them to and from the campuses. On several of our sites, we're going to need this type of drop-off zone, right? Because we just don't have it in several cases. So again, this is just one hypothetical scenario we're looking at. The project architect we're working with, just in terms of quarterbacking those efforts and dialogues, has a number of different options and scenarios for the given campuses, right? But at this point in time, we're taking that deep dive. So I just wanted to keep that on the radar because it really feels like it's part of that facility master plan. It's just that, individual component, separate takeaway. With respect to Pauley High School, there's a few activities that are currently underway and a few more that are going to be coming down the pipeline relatively soon. So to date, we've hosted a number of focus group meetings. So we wanted to get a number of different folks in the room and just start talking Pauley High School specifically. So we've met with a number of educators, a number of students, really appreciation to the Pauley admin team for helping us identify, key stakeholders, students and staff we can talk to at this particular level on the front end, just smaller focus groups. So met with a number of folks on the IT side of the house, the athletic side of the house, definitely met with folks in terms of career pathway discussions, and those have been fruitful to date, but it's really just teeing up the conversations that are going to follow. We've established a planning committee, just like we did for the facility master plan. We've also established a planning committee for this particular effort. We envision hosting a town hall for this effort as well. We know there's a lot of interest, a lot of stakeholders from this particular high school, and we want to hear from them, right? So just what are the needs? What do we project out there? I'll add, because really this is what teed up this particular discussion. One of our efforts that's already in the planning stages is the addition of a new 2-story classroom building for this campus, and really what would coincide with demolition of a few other structures. Already planned for this campus is an aquatic center and some other projects. So the thought was, look, let's take this deep dive first, develop a specific campus-wide master plan so we identify the correct placement for those particular projects before we just start having a hodgepodge of different buildings out there, right? So that teed up the initial discussion. I envision this particular process taking us, perhaps the rest of the calendar year, just to wrap up, but it's exciting. So just wanted to close with that particular project. Dr. Baker, I think, has a few comments.
Just a little comment about that one. So what you're talking about is future-facing work that has begun to be processed, but that would be dependent on additional funds coming either from a school bond or,
Yes.
Correct.
or coming from a school bond as part of the future-facing facility master plan.
Correct.
Yes. Before we jump into questions, I wanted to take just a quick moment to right a wrong that I did. I wanted to take a minute and introduce Mr. David Van Westerhuizen, who's our Director of Maintenance, and I want to give him credit and his team's credit that a lot of the things that I took the opportunity to talk to you about today are really from the hard work that David has done and the teams in maintenance have done in order to really address some of the needs out there. So I apologize, David, I forgot to introduce you as I began speaking, so I wanted to make sure I did that.
Okay, colleagues, quick questions.
I don't know, David, if they've already shared with you. Usually when people come for the very first time, we have them do just a small selection from Celine Dion for about 45 minutes. Are you prepared already?
Mr. Miller,
your ears at this point. That wouldn't be a good idea.
Mr. Miller, if you knew David, he will do that.
I'll share Mr. Miller. Right before this presentation started, I looked to my left and asked him if he was just as excited as I am to be here. He said yes, so we're good.
Glad to hear it.
It's interesting what you put the TKK picture here, the sample project review. It feels very familiar, and like we've learned some lessons when we did the EduCare project on the Barton campus and how to take an existing campus and modify it for our littlest learners and the parents and the needs that they have. And my only other quick comment around the furniture is it looks super inclusive. That we know our students with disabilities have very specific needs in some classrooms, but in other classrooms, they may have a mobility device or something else that requires a little more space, and that our old school desk attached to a chair couldn't necessarily accommodate that. And the options that are in front of us seem to really just allow folks to learn in a way that's comfortable for them, whether it's a little taller or a little wider or not needing a chair because they have their own, that kind of thing. So I just noticed that, and I just wanted to call that out. Colleagues, we have anything else?
Yeah, just really quickly. With the Poly High School engagement piece, I'm not going to pretend as though Poly isn't an academic, what is it, home of scholars and champions? We've got plenty of scholars, but everybody knows that they're a huge emphasis on their sports teams. I wanted to make sure with our engagement efforts, what's been our efforts to engage their athletics groups into these conversations?
Yeah, so we included their athletic director and a handful of coaches really in these early efforts. And by early efforts, I mean just a series of meetings over the course of the last week, right? So we're just starting to kick the tires on this particular effort. Wanted to make sure we get in front of the board as well, just so you understand the game plan going forward. But again, it's just we're about 1 week into these engagement efforts, and there's quite a few more meetings to follow.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, seeing no other comments or questions, thanks, team. Thank you, David, and to your team, really, who has done a ton of work these last 2 weeks to make our students and staff feel as comfortable as possible. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the last piece. Dr. Baker, did you want to kick us off? I'm going to let Dr. Benitez go first because he is on a time crunch.
Sure,
in
really
terms
just
of-
an opportunity at the end of this day that started with talking about reimagining LBUSD for students in 2035, and a really rich conversation about what will be the vision and strategic planning process, reimagining school safety, and then ending with this really good discussion about what's happening with facilities. So we just built in, it looks like less than 15 minutes today. If are any requests that the board wants to make for follow-up, I have a list of things that you've requested previously, or just any closing conversation that you all want to have about what you discussed today.
Dr. Benitez?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Baker. I'll be very quick, President Kerr. So I'll work backwards. So I think the last 2 weeks, actually I should say the first couple of weeks of our opening up of our academic year were very helpful in reminding us how important our facilities are to the core of our values around equity and student success. So if there's ever doubt, right, that modern, accessible, in some cases new, in other cases up-to-date, high-quality facilities allow for us to fulfill our mission. So it's always good to be reminded of some of the structural challenges that we have, but also some of the external factors that we need to consider to be able to fulfill our mission. And prior to that, of course, I want to thank again our Safer Schools group, Dr. Brown, for, I'll start with thanking Safer Schools for, in some cases, helping our district, in other cases, pushing our district in a good way to advance our conversations and our work, concrete work, around reimagining school safety for students in a holistic approach. And I've been thinking sort of the last hour and a half that my comments in framing the conversation, I want to apologize to the Safer Schools group, and particularly to Dr. Tabari, because I in no way attempted to dismiss the expertise. And so if my comments were interpreted in that way, I want to publicly apologize that I did not attempt, nor did I desire to dismiss any of the expertise from our parents and community members, nor from our experts in here. But I did have a question, and my framing was around the research that was presented. So that's why I directed my comments and my follow-up. And I was glad that President Kerr also clarified that it was Dr. V that was the one collecting the data. So because I framed my comments that way, but I in no way intended to dismiss the expertise here in the room. And then to our morning session, I am excited and looking forward to the development of our strategic plan, and as part of that, to anchoring the work, and I heard that this morning, and I've heard it from our team and from Dr. Salazar this morning, to upholding our commitments around community engagement. And at the core, I mean, that's what drives our work. And so I'm looking forward to and excited to the next phase of that work. Thank you, President.
Reflections, learnings, wonderings after today. Mr. Miller.
So I've been fortunate to participate in a number of workshops now. So now I have one to compare the last one to. But all things considered, I'm just always very humbled at all of the great work that's being done behind the scenes that we get an opportunity to see firsthand. With that said, I also recognize the amount of effort that's needed to be put forth to put these workshops together, both from an daily preparedness, also with things that have happened 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead. With that said, there's one person in particular who I don't know gets enough recognition for keeping both us supported, but also making sure that from just a practical day-to-day component in regards to even things as small as making sure if we've had a cup of coffee and a glass of water. I want to thank Letitia, because she always has our back. She takes very good care of us, and I just really appreciate you. I've been watching you today, and I was just like, she's so behind the scenes, and I just really, really appreciate you. So thank you.
Ms. Craighead.
Sure, thanks. I just want to thank everybody for all their hard work and for always representing the best interest of our students, the best our district has to offer. And I know some of our collaborations are a little rough, a little bumpy at times, but I think it speaks to the quality of people that we have, that we go forward, that even though it's not an easy road, we still go forward. And this morning we were looking forward all the way to 2035, because our students that are in kindergarten this year will graduate from high school in 2035. And it was very exciting to see the possibilities of what education could be like, what types of things we can consider in far as robotics and holograms and all these things that I think back to my kindergarten self. I could not even imagine that kind of thing, except maybe the possibilities that Star Trek kind of introduced to culture. Because if you think, now listen, because in watching Star Trek from the 1960s or whatever, they were using things that were kind of like a flip phone. That was way before mobile. Yeah. And I'm not going to say we're going to beam people up anywhere, but I'm just saying, when you think creatively, when you're inspired by whether it's creativity in from our entertainment world or wherever it comes from, wherever the inspiration comes from, we have to look to that, because that is going to help us prepare for the future, because we don't know what our kids need to know 10 years from now, 20 years from now. We don't know that yet, but that we're open-minded, that we're looking towards the future, means that we want to prepare them for whatever the future brings. And that's exciting, and that's hopeful. And everything else is just part and parcel of what we do. But thank you, everybody, for being a part of all that.
Can we look in previous board records to see if they were talking about spandex technology and how that would improve our educational system? I'm sure. Spandex.
Who said spandex?
Well, because of Star Trek.
We'll talk later.
Ms. Dorado, do you have any comments?
Spandex is in the bond measure, and so we'll be all right, I think, when we're done. So. No, I thought this morning was remarkable. I thought that it was a good kickoff. It was inspirational. I've been involved in a number of strategic plans, and this was the most exciting, forward-thinking, well thought out, and I'm looking forward to participating in it. And to the comments about our role here as board members in terms of what we do. We do get into hard conversations sometimes, and they're not because we disagree with members of the public who feel very passionately about things that are going on, but there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what school boards do. School boards do not specifically solve individual problems, they set policy. And the policies that they set are the policies that then guide what it is that we do. That's the good news. The bad news is that we've got to give it to the superintendent to do all this stuff, and but that's the way it works. And we listen, we hear, we talk. I sometimes think we're underappreciated for what our role is, because in the end, we have to think through things that nobody's thinking about. If I had a nickel for every call that I've had since I became a member of this board to please solve this problem or that problem, I would be not wealthy, but approaching wealth, I think. But you know, it's a very simple situation. I just always tell people you got to talk to your principal. Your principal's the person that is going to be able to solve your problems. I am a policy person. When I talk to all the principals at the very beginning of my term, and I talked to them each individually, I said to them, if you have a problem, call the office. And if you can't solve it with the office, call them again. And if you can't solve them, then I don't know what to tell you, because I'm not a policy. I'm a policy person. I am not a problem-solving person. And that doesn't mean that I don't have constituents and I don't have people that look to me for things, and I have to gently guide them to what it is that we really do up here. And at the same time, keep them informed about what it is that's going on. In fact, the piece that I thought was underemphasized in the strategic planning presentation that we had today was that in the end, it's the communications with the community that will make all the difference in the world. Because it's one thing to listen to them, it's one thing to take it into consideration, but then you make decisions, and what you have to do is to let them know that these are the decisions, and and this is the direction that we're heading, and it's really important to emphasize that. And I think sometimes we don't do that, because not only does it build confidence with the people that use this district, but it inspires people, it gets them moving, and it's that relationship between this district and our students and the parents that we have to build confidence in on an ongoing basis. So that's what I took away from today.
Thank you. I'll just add a little bit about what a great way to ground the work when we talk about things like facilities and safety policies and those kinds of things. That this morning we got to start the conversation by grounding in the work in the hopes that we have for this strategic plan process. So we got to start this process when we did our community engagement sessions around the values of our community. And so now we get to operationalize that and create a plan for the next 3 to 5 years of basing what we're going to do on the values that we hold. So I would ask the public to continue to engage with us and engage with us again as you start to get more information about the opportunities to chat with us, to engage in virtual learning in multiple areas. I'm sure Dr. Baker will talk a lot about that, but that's coming in October to a community near you, and opportunities to be engaged in some core teamwork. So thank you to those folks who continue to want to be involved and engaged, and who dream forward, into 2035 with us for what's best for our students and for the adults who help our students get to be the people we're hoping they'll be when they graduate. And so thanks to the team, again, for continuing to engage for Safer LBUSD Coalition, thank you again for continuing to partner with us, engage with us, share and push. It's always interesting to go back and look at the timeline and the evolution of the work. And while there were some years that there weren't big things on the calendar, we know that the work has been continuing in those meetings that some folks don't see that happen behind the scenes, but that, happen in a way that directly impacts conversations that we have and practices that are in place. So thank you to those folks for coming out, to my colleagues for engaging in the work. Dr. Baker, if you want to take us home, other than that, we will see folks tomorrow at 5.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to make a note because each of you has mentioned this morning's session. This morning's session was recorded. It will be posted to our strategic planning site. It was an active workshop session, so what the public will be able to see is what it looks like in the room. They'll be able to, when there's one person speaking on the mic, they'll be able to follow the workshop as it was, but it wasn't live streamed because it was really a full working session. So I just wanted to make note of that. And thank you. Thank you for a great day of learning and discussing.
All right. So we're adjourned. We'll see you back here tomorrow night at 5. Thanks, everybody.